Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon to another F4S digital event. Today is marking International Earth Day, and the topic today that we're going to be talking about is responsible consumption. We've got three fantastic speakers here from a variety of different industries. They're going to give you a great insight into what they do, how they got there, and how those sorts of green careers are going to be available for you when you're looking at the sort of things you want to do. I'm Andrew. I'm one of the engagement managers here at Founders for Schools. I'll just be moderating the session and asking any questions. In terms of questions, your microphones and cameras will be off all the way through the session, but we will have a chat open. So if you've got any questions for any of the speakers, please put them in as they're talking, because we've got three speakers and we're quite short on time. We might not have a full Q&A at the end, but if you've got questions that come up as people are speaking, I will ask them as we go. So in terms of the structure, that's the way we're going to do it. For any teachers that are watching us, this gives you a great example of the sort of Founders for School event that you can set up in your school. And if you want any more information about how to do that, you can contact us or have a look at our website as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Katrina. She is a project manager at Batalyzer, and I shall leave her to tell you more about it from there. So thank you very much, Katrina.
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Katrina, and I'm, like Andrew said, a project manager at a startup called Batalyzer Systems. So I'm going to start a little bit at the beginning and work towards how I got here and tell you about what I do now and how it links to the theme of responsible consumption. So when I was at school, I knew I quite enjoyed science and maths, but I think I already understood at that time that I didn't like the pure theoreticalness of it. What I really enjoyed was applying science and maths to the real world, and that's what I figured that engineering was, and I think that's still a fairly good definition of what engineering is. And so just about a month before the UCAS deadline, I chose engineering and studied a course that was called General Engineering. So I did a bit of all the different types of engineering for the first 2 years at university. It was a 4-year course. So studied a bit of thermal, a bit of electrical, a bit of civil, how buildings stand up. And then for my last 2 years, I specialized in a topic called manufacturing engineering, which is about how stuff gets made. So everything, I think it's such a cool topic because everything in this world is made, the laptop I'm speaking to, my cup, the table, everything is made, and how you design that so that it can be made easily in a factory, and how you can design your factory to make stuff efficiently and cheaply was really interesting. I loved that. So then I left university, had no idea what I wanted to do, no idea about the world of startups that I would end up in, which I really love. So I started with quite a general course, which is kind of a general topic, which is strategy consulting, which was quite interesting, and you learn a bit about how companies work, but it really wasn't what I loved. And so after doing that for a few years, I jumped into my first startup, where I joined as the first employee, the first hire, where we were looking at solar-powered desalination, which is turning seawater into drinking water. That was really interesting. I loved that. And then a few months ago, I joined a second startup, which is where I work now, called Batalyzer Systems. And that is also in this field of clean technology, so kind of green stuff that helps the energy transition. And I'm a project manager here. So what does Batalyzer do? We have an integrated battery and electrolyzer product. So a battery is like you have in your iPhone or your mobile phone or your laptop. It stores electrical charge, and an electrolyzer is something that produces hydrogen. So you take water and it splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen, and hydrogen and there's an increasing demand in the use of hydrogen, in some cases as an alternative to fossil fuels and natural gas. So why is this interesting? So firstly, like I said, there's an increase in demand for hydrogen. Secondly, as we move towards having more of our electricity in our grid produced by renewables as opposed to fossil fuels, you produce electricity when the sun shines or when the wind blows. And that means our energy production varies a lot more than it did before, when we would just switch on the coal-fired power plant, you would just have a steady production. So with the battery, the technology, the Batalyzer, the thing that we're developing, you can instantly turn on or turn off your hydrogen production based on whether the wind is blowing or the sun is shining. So my job is project manager for developing the next round of prototypes. So it's a technology that's come out of a university based in the Netherlands, actually. So Technical University of Delft. They invented the technology, and they are so it's in an early pilot prototype stage, and so we're developing it so that it can be made at a big scale. And that's my job, and I really love it. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Katrina. If anyone's got any questions for Katrina, pop them in the chat and we will circle back to that as we go through the session. But yeah, really interesting, Katrina, really interesting to hear the different things that are going on really in that sort of sector, and how things really have an impact on the way that we consume. So that's great. We're going to hand over to our next speaker, who's Amy Thomas. Amy is a graduate at Aviva Investments. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, Amy, a little bit how you got to where you are now, and in terms of what you do and how that has an impact on sort of consumption and sustainability and the world around us, that would be fantastic. So I'll hand over to you, Amy.
Hiya, my name's Amy. Sorry about my voice, I have a bit of a cough. So I'm a graduate, so that means I rolled straight out of university and I've gone straight into a job. So I come a bit of a weird way into my job. I went and did a law degree, which was very different for me because I've always liked science and maths in my school days, but I really wanted a law degree. I watched Legally Blonde when I was about 14, and I really wanted to do that. So come out of that knowing I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I need to do something else, something a bit more interesting. And that's how I found out about Aviva Investors and what they do. And so as soon as I came out of university, I was very lucky that I already had a job to go into. And now I get trained essentially on the job, if you will. Every 6 months, I rotate to different teams, and I get to experience what every different team gets to do in order for when I roll off the scheme, which is in September, I have a full rounded experience of what we do at Aviva Investors, specifically in real assets, as that's where I work. So what is real assets and what is Aviva Investors? So Aviva Investors as a whole, we're an investment company, so we will raise money for our investors so that when they retire, for example, they will have that big money at the end, so they have continuous money for their retirement. So, for example, let's say you have these investors and they put in about 50 grand, let's say, and they aim to have more than that over time. They're aiming for, let's say, about 1% increase per year. And that's how we will have our targets, and we will invest according to that target. So what do we invest in? Of course, there's our different asset classes where we can invest in companies, we can buy shares of companies, and that's how we invest in other ways. But where I work specifically is called real assets, and what that means is any real physical thing we can invest in. So that whether that's buildings, schools, your wind, solar panels, wind farms, all of that sort of thing. So that's what we invest in, and we will either own them or loan out debt, so we can raise money for our mandates or our investors. So relating this to ESG and responsible consumption, we have a massive focus around what we call ESG. What ESG stands for is environmental, social, and governance. Environmental is very easy to deal with. That's where we'll reduce carbon consumption, we'll reduce anything that's carbon or gas suppliers, anything like that. We'll try and reduce that and do a bit more renewable energy, electricity, and things like that. And that's how we will choose. It has a massive impact on how we choose to invest our money or our investors' money. So, and that's really important, because if you think about it, where the money goes has a big influence on how things change in the market or generally in life. I mean, if you're taking money away from, say, Shell or any of the oil, petrol places, and you start putting those money into those wind farms or solar panels, suddenly there will be a shift in the market because petrol will become so much more expensive, as it has done, and electricity from specifically renewables will become cheaper because there's so much money put into it that they become more efficient, and there's more money available for researching it, making them better, and all the rest of it. There's a huge impact in what we do. For what I do in my role, so in September, I'm actually rolling off to be a permanent member full-time in the ESG team. What that means is any investment that comes our way will go to our ESG team. So for me, for example, and I will have that full say in investigating this investment and go, well, actually, how does this impact our world? What impact does our money have? Are we giving money to people who don't employ diversely or don't use renewable energy or any of that stuff? So it has a huge impact on what we do, and we can make that final say and say, actually, we can't invest in that because that doesn't align with our goals. It doesn't align with what we want to do or see the world coming out.
That's brilliant, Amy. Thank you so much for giving us that sort of overview of what it is you do, but also how you got into that role as well. Questions are starting to come in. We'll circle back to them all at the end. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to our third speaker, who's Nishul. Nishul's got a background in financial startups and technology firms, but now is an investor in a variety of organisations, including green startups. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, Nishul, and sort of what you've done and what you do now? That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So I started my career not actually in a different place from Katrina. I was an engineer. I went and looked into what I wanted to do, and I like science and maths, but I also wanted to apply it and definitely do something less theoretical. So I went into engineering, and doing engineering was actually a great start to my career in terms of like giving me options, because it gave me options to go into consulting, finance, engineering. And engineering is a great subject because you learn to be very much a problem solver. After that, I worked in finance for a bit, and then I met a group of people who were building a startup in the financial technology space, financial data space, and worked with them for 9 years. The company did really well, some great people, and actually recently just got sold to S&P for $40 billion. And I spent a decade there, and I thought, wow, this is really fun and exciting to be part of building something. And so after that, I was, what am I going to do? And I was thinking, okay, I want to stay close to startups. So over that time, what I've been doing is actually doing a lot of advisory work. I had another go at another startup myself, which unfortunately had the opposite conclusion to market, and well, it was interesting to realize that is actually the norm, not so much. My first experience was a very skewed perspective on how startups go. I'm also a partner in a vegan plant-based sweets company. As you might know, a lot of sweets have gelatin in them, which is derived from animal product, and we've developed a way to remove that but still have it to be quite chewy. And in the last few years, I was asking myself, after I shut down that startup that didn't work, what is it do I want to do? And I remember going to see a coach, and out of that came out that I actually I wanted to do something to help coral reefs because I'm a scuba diver, and that actually set me off on a journey, which at the time when I came out of that, I was like, wow, what do I know about coral reefs? What can I do to help coral reefs? Because I don't know, I'm not a scientist. But over the last few years, as Amy has been pointing out, one of the things that's been happening is that business and the world in general is starting to think much more about what we do with our planet and how we are using it, and looking to be a bit more considerate, because obviously people are realizing there's finite resources, climate change is happening, we're damaging a lot of biodiversity, and with that in mind, I've come to see that there's a massive intersection now happening between climate tech and sustainability technology and startups. And so I've been investing, and actually most of my time now is advising startups which are in this space. So I'm what you call an entrepreneur in residence at what you call a venture builder, which basically throws a lot of people together who are qualified to go and build startups which can help reduce the amount of carbon that's emitted in industry. and challenge them to form teams and build startups. So there's a startup that's taking the process of producing beer actually ends up wasting a lot of grain. And so there's a startup which is taking that grain and turning it into something that's usable for protein, as protein product. So instead of eating chicken, you can have this as an input into foods that are made there. There's a company I'm advising which is taking carbon fiber composite. That also has a lot of waste material, and recycling that waste material and turning it into what you call virgin carbon fiber, so it can be used again. That also reduces the amount of CO2 that's embedded. There's a company which is helping to spot disease and pests in crops a lot more easily, and that is again a good contributor, because a lot less food waste means a lot less carbon used in actually producing that food. And also, I mean, soil, as you might or might not know, is one of the planks upon which that we are trying to help with the fight against climate change, because over the last 50 years, it's been recognized that the soil that we have around the planet has been degraded significantly, partly because of the intensive farming methods we've been using. And there's a push to go away from that, but that also means reducing use of pesticides and fertilizers, which might be what you use to help fight disease and pests. So you've got to find better ways of doing that, and so there's companies helping do that. There's a bunch of others out there, and but all in all, the goal is to try and help reduce the amount of carbon that's emitted. And you know, so I've been really heartened to find that the world is moving along a path where it's having much more acknowledgement of the natural resources that are being used. And I mean, my career is actually been quite meandering, but now headed towards this. And it's been really exciting to be part of helping to build companies which are changing the way the world works, but also do something which I feel I add a lot of value to, and can hopefully, you know, also make a decent living out of potentially. So that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ashul. Always interesting hearing you speak about the really varied journey that you've had getting to where you are. Just in terms of questions, we've got a couple coming in, so we'll go to Katrina first, and there's a question for Ashul, and then something for everyone. Katrina, so we've been asked, you know, your job sounds really fascinating. How quickly will your prototype come to market, and how long does it take to get from design to manufacturing?
Very good question. The answer is greatly dependent between technologies. For this one, we've got really ambitious targets, and the reason they're so ambitious is because we see there's a huge growth in hydrogen demand coming in a couple of years, and we want to be ready in time to catch the wave, as they say, and be in a position to be a big player in the provision of hydrogen. So for us, we need to work really fast. So we're trying. Our aim is to get something. Is to have. So at pilot stage now, we want to have a number of medium-sized commercial demonstrator projects. So they won't be the final product, but there'll be something close to it that we do sell to customers and they install them. And then from 2024 onwards, we want to be selling. The research started at the university properly in 2014. So it's a 10-year R&D to hopefully product timeline, and I think and that's an ambitious number of years. So it's quite a long time.
Brilliant. Yeah, long time. I imagine lots of different stages and different versions as you go through that. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Great answer for that. One for yourself, Ashul, just about what the difference is really in terms of working for a small startup or a big, well-established organization. What have you found in those different environments?
Sure, absolutely. It's a good question. And I've experienced a bit of both. I think in a startup, there's a lot more onus and responsibility on the people within that company to take that company forward. And so it requires a slightly different mindset. I think you need to have a lot of initiative. You want to embrace responsibility. But at the same time, also, there's a lot more uncertainty because often the future of the company is not certain. Whereas in a big company, you tend to be able to be, it fits probably if you're a bit more passive and you like work coming your way, because in a big company, often you have a defined role, but but your ability to have an impact on that firm is less, right? So, I mean, in a small company, when there's 10 of you, you can imagine you are 10% of that business in terms of the resource, in terms of the people, and you can have a massive impact on that. Whereas if you're in a big company with like 10,000 people, how much you contribute to that whole company's success is going to be significantly less, right? So I think it depends on, if you like taking responsibility, I think you'll thrive in the startup. And as long as you can also tolerate the risk, I think there's a lot more, it can be a lot more challenging working in a startup, definitely, right? There's a lot of talk, especially much more now, about managing your mental health and the ups and downs, because one day you can get a new sale and you think, oh, maybe this company's going to make it, and then the next day a big company says no, a big potential client says no, and then suddenly, oh my god, I don't know if I'm going to make it. So whereas being in a big company is a little more even and maybe less pressure, I think. So I mean, those are the main things which come to my mind.
Brilliant, great, thanks, really good insight. That really useful. Question for Amy: what's it like working in so many different departments? Do you have to change the way you think, the way you work?
Yes, definitely have to change the way I think each time. So my rotations start every 6 months, and I always found that every time I change into a new team, there's always that first month or so of initial having to readjust to the new team. Obviously, you have to get used to new people and meet them all. But when you do have to go into a different team, there is a way that you have to adjust in that. Sometimes, for example, if I go in the asset management team, I'm dealing directly with the assets. So, for example, I will be managing directly an office or a shopping centre, and I will have to manage, the day-to-day activities, whether that's ensuring that tenants are paying on time, whether that's getting a new tenant in, or making sure the tenant, when their lease expires, whether we want to renew their tenancy, or make sure that they leave it in a good state. And then when you move to another team, for example, the team I'm currently in, which is portfolio management, that's a lot more macro view. I mean, you're much more on the top looking down. So you'll be looking across a portfolio, like a group of different assets, and you have to look at the how they're all performing on top level view. Or going to the other side of the floor, you could be looking at not just equity. That means directly owning an asset. I could be looking on the debt side where I've lent so much money to a particular project. For example, it could be a startup, or it could be a wind farm or a solar panel, and I have to look at it from a different way. You can't look at it in the same way you're looking at a shopping centre, for example. You've got to change entirely, think of it in another way, in that this is a wind farm, they generate the money in a different way, there's different cash flows, or you got to think about ESG in a different way. It's quite interesting. I mean, there's always that month at the beginning where everyone knows that you're new in the team and they understand that you've got a lot to learn, and there's always a steep learning curve every time you change teams. But it is fun. Everyone's very welcoming in each team I've joined.
Brilliant, that's great. Thanks, Amy. Really good answer. And we'll do one last question, which will be directed at all three of you. You're all in really varied roles, but also at really different stages of your career. If there was one thing, whether it be advice or just something to consider, that you would give to someone who's, sort of 16, looking at what they want to do in terms of their career, one thing that stuck with you or served you well, is there anything that you would say to someone in that situation? If we start with Nishal.
Sure. I remember in the early part of my career, there's two things I really optimized for. That was finding good people to work with who are experienced and I can learn a lot from, and learning a lot, basically putting myself in a position where I can actually absorb and learn a lot and grow. And that provides a great base for you to go and accelerate your career in the long term. So I turned down roles which were paying more money when I went to market, because I thought that in the long run I'm going to be better off here. And I can't say for sure whether it proved, because I don't know what the other path looks like, but I don't regret my decision.
Brilliant, that's great, thank you. Katrina, yourself?
Well, that's really good advice. Maybe one very practical tip that I've learned is that, especially if you're looking to apply to startups or small companies, is that even if you just absolutely love what they're doing, like, this is, this company is exactly what you want to work on, you're super passionate about it, but they don't have a vacancy open that you think might work, just send them your CV anyway, or write them a letter saying, this is exactly what I want to do with my life. I'm so passionate about what you're doing. And you might just get lucky that they're saying, oh, we have a vacancy we're opening in a couple of months. We weren't going to open it yet, but most of the time you won't, it won't work like that. But just, yeah, for especially small companies that can be more flexible than the big companies, if they're doing what you love, just send them an email, and get in touch anyway. And even if you're at school age, just send them an email and just say, please, can I come and do a work experience? You might, sometimes they might say no, but you might just get lucky and they say yes. And if you really show them your enthusiasm and your passion, then you might get lucky.
Brilliant. I think that's great advice. Put yourself out there and see what's available. I think that's fantastic. And yourself, Amy, anything that served you well up to this stage in your career?
The one advice I really took to heart was the biggest asset you can have is having a really good attitude to learn, because you're never going to know everything, really. But if you have that attitude of willingness and just wanting to learn as you go, it will take you so far, honestly. And the other thing that my dad always told me, actually, was that it's okay not to know what you want to be when you grow up. I still don't know. I love what I do, and it's just so important to have that flexibility and just going with the flow. And it doesn't matter, because you are 16, 18, you are still young. You don't need to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And you just find out what do you enjoy, but also knowing what you don't enjoy is equally as important. So just getting all the experience you can and just working with what you like, what you enjoy, and also what you're good at.
Fantastic. I think that's great advice, and something I've seen from this session and other sessions like it. The amount of people who speak who've had incredibly varied careers and have moved from what would seem like unrelated areas between them seems that happens an awful lot. So you absolutely do not have to be tied into something going forward. So I think that's brilliant. That brings us to the end of this session. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all three of our speakers today. Really, really great insight into a whole variety of perspectives in terms of the roles available, the sort of career paths you can take, and how all of that can have a positive impact in terms of the world around us and consumption and sustainability. I think that's fantastic, and we couldn't do these sessions without you. So thank you very much for volunteering your time. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us today for the sessions throughout the whole day and the different ones that we've run. We will be having other sessions in the future, so please do keep an eye out for that. And if you would like to book something specific for in your school with speakers like those that you've heard from today, then please do get in touch with us. That is everything that we've got time for today. One last thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and goodbye. Enjoy your week.